Admittedly, I've always had a love and hate relationship when it comes to I'm Standing on a Million Lives, but as the second season comes around, I was really looking for it to kind of improve a lot of the things that I was having issues with while kind of evolving the formula itself. But this is my review of I'm Standing on a Million Lives, the second season, a series that aired in the summer 2021 anime season. So let's jump right into it. For those unfamiliar with I'm Standing on a Million Lives, it essentially follows a group of students who, over time, are pulled into this sort of game. It starts off with a girl named Shindo who is pulled into this other world, assigned a quest by some sort of being, and told to complete a quest in a certain amount of time. After completing this quest, she's allowed to ask one single question of this certain being before being assigned to find the next person that will be a part of her party, which ends up being Hakozaki. Following her and Hakozaki finishing a mission, she eventually comes across the main protagonist, who is Yatsuya. And thus, through his perspective, we're able to see this whole process. And as we finish the first season, they have essentially acquired 5 total members. Yatsuya, which is the main protagonist, Shindo, who is this model girl that is also in his class, Hakozaki, who is also in his class, who is very kind of frail, Takitate, who is kind of like this nerd that does some live streaming, and finally at the end of the season, we were introduced to Tori, who is this boy who his mother has kind of come across some hard times and he was being forced to do some criminal acts. And we were sort of leaving the first season with this idea that Yatsuya doesn't like the real world. He actually hates the society that's around him. But we never really got an idea of why that was. There was like some hints of some things, but not really a clear perspective. But he also discovered that their whole reasoning for going to this other world and doing these quests was to basically strengthen them so that when the day comes that an attack arrives in our world, they will be able to defend against it. And going into the second season, we kind of repeat this formula where we have Tori is now part of the group. They go in, they do a quest, then eventually they find another party member, and so on and so forth. I think the only other thing that was kind of interesting that they included in this was this little element that this new member that they added to the party was seemingly looking into other heroes, but not really going much further than that. So yeah, what I meant by in the intro is this series, I've always had kind of a love and a hate relationship. I think the thing that I enjoy most about this series, and I think is continuing on into this season, is I love how these characters, despite being put into situations where they don't really have the best capabilities, most everything they fight is like extremely powerful and they can basically one-shot the characters, they always have to find some way of getting around the situation. And I always enjoy things like Yatsuya's ability to kind of adapt to the situation. As you'll know, based on the first season, Yatsuya is given like the worst classes possible. Like early on, he's given a farmer class. Later on, he's given a chef class. So he's not always given classes that are adept for actually fighting, whereas everybody else around him sort of gets the warrior classes and the mage classes, even though it seems like mage classes are always useless. Everybody around him always gets the good classes, and he always has to kind of work with what he's got. Oh, he becomes a blacksmith. What good is that? Oh, well, he can make weapons to make the others adapt. Those kind of interesting things were always something I was drawn to. Also, basically, the system of the world itself, like, if they die, they have, like, a certain respawn time. So, as long as one of them stays alive, the rest can respawn. What happens when part of the self gets eaten by something? Well, it makes it a little more difficult to respawn. Again, like, the RPG mechanics of the world were always the kind of the interesting thing. And like I said, how Yatsuya overcomes things. But the thing that I've always been kind of frustrated with was Yatsuya. He's always been a character that has, like, this extreme hatred for things, but it's never really explained in a way that I care to really understand. Like, for example, the flashback that we get in the first season was this tree that him and his friends made something in, and the construction came and took it out, and thus he hates the world. I've never understood it. He really does have a deep hatred for people around him, the selfishness of mankind, as well as the fact that even despite that, he even admits his own hypocrisy in doing things that are disgusting. There's a point in this story where he does something that essentially wipes out something for his own convenience, which is exactly why he hates mankind. But it, in a sense, doesn't make any sense. He's a fan of things like eugenics. He's a fan of things like basically sacrificing those that are around him for the sake of reaching the goal. It hits so heavy on the fact that he's kind of a nasty person, and people around him even point it out, but it doesn't feel like it's really going anywhere. And it wasn't until probably the last episode of this season where I almost felt like there was some sort of advancement in his character, because everything before then felt like it was counter to what he's saying. Like, he says one thing, but he reacts a different way. And so I was always hoping for them to really point it out, but they never really do. Except for at some point later on the second season, they actually finally go, okay, well, it does seem like this is where his mindset has changed. Whether it be good or for bad, you'll have to see. But yeah, Yatsuya aside, a lot of the characters are kind of dumb in the decisions they make, which is, I guess, fine. People make mistakes in the heat of the moment. It does create some laughs. This show is technically willing to get dark, so keep that in mind. There's especially one particular scene in this season where it just felt wrong. Like, it felt difficult to watch because what they were technically portraying. There's always a sense that Yatsuya feels like because of the decisions he made in the first season, which are technically affecting real lives, is sort of weighing on him and making him out to believe that he needs to be the one that dirties his hands going forward because of that decision. And it's in things like that where I do believe that there's something really interesting and storytelling-wise to go here. Again, even though I have my frustration with Yatsuya, they are technically doing some really interesting things with him, really letting him kind of swim around in that gray area of the villain versus the hero. And that's something that, again, I've always been fascinated with, even though I do get frustrated with him as a character. So again, even though I do have my frustrations with this show, and I always feel like I want to drop it, I still always keep coming back. So I guess that's saying something about the show and the story itself. As for the quests themselves, I don't really feel so much like this season's quests were all that interesting. I think with the first season, there was some of them that drug out, especially the one where they had to basically cover the map and they were each kind of facing their own difficulties. It felt like it kind of drug out a little bit, but they were interesting quests altogether. Whereas I think with this season, it wasn't so much interesting, and a lot of them really did, again, feel very drug out. They technically had 2 quests in this particular season, and especially the second quest really just didn't do much for me at all. Whereas the first quest just kind of really hit heavy on Yatsuya's mentality and really getting heavy into the realm of who is the villain, who is the hero. As for the presentation of the show itself, it moved somewhat. I don't even think with the first season the show looked good at all. And I think with the second season it was even more present. Very much so a lack of animation. A lot of the action scenes are just really panning stills. A lot of the character designs struggle. It's unfortunately not a very good looking show. I think the music and everything else is fine. It's just, it just struggles in the production department altogether with Maho Films. With all that said, I think I'm Standing on a Million Lives continues to be one of the more unique isekai shows, even though it doesn't deliver in every single way that it goes. I think it has a lot of elements in here that I love exploring, such as the mechanics, Yatsuya's kind of clever uses of what he has available to him in order to overcome something, which is never just brute strength. The realm of digging around in the gray area of good and evil has always been kind of fascinating, but it's all kind of technically marred by some kind of difficult to understand characters, some quest lines that seem to kind of drag out, and some poor animation. But other than that, it's technically a solid watch. If you definitely have time, I'd check it out if any of that sounds interesting to you. But that's my thoughts. If you like this video, please leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of the series, or if you're going to check it out. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon if you can. And y'all take care.